Welcome. This is our CCS, U.S. Center for Coastal Solutions monthly forum, and we're really excited to have Dr. Anna Braswell present today. She's an assistant professor in the School of Forest, Fisheries, and Geomatics Science. She received her PhD in environmental science from Duke University and is working on coastal ecosystems ecology and is interested in the formation, persistence, and degradation of coastal ecosystems within the context of surrounding terrestrial, marine, and urban systems. And through her cross-appointment with Florida Sea Grant, she also works with stakeholders and managers to create tools and educational products to better maintain coastal watersheds and ecosystems. And thank you so much for presenting to us today. And so we will hand it over to you. And at the very end, we will also update everyone on some news and shout outs on the CCS.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry. No, it's okay. Just 1 second. I figured this out. Okay. Here we go. Minimize. Okay, I like to stand up, so I'm going to stand up. Thank you, Nina, for your awesome introduction. Again, I'm Anna Braswell, and today I'm going to be talking to you about a project I've been working on for the past 3 to 4 years, thinking about how drought impacts salt marsh restoration projects. And I wouldn't be able to do this work alone, so I wanted to start out with acknowledgement of all of my collaborators. So graduate students from here at UF, as well as hydrologists from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and our awesome, amazing manager partners at Elkhorn and Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve, including Kirsten Watson and Monique Fountain, who are really the brainchilds behind the whole restoration project. And we can't see anything. Hold on 1 second. Let me minimize more. Hide photo control. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So just to take you through a quick outline of what I want to talk about. First, I'm going to introduce you a little bit to how drought impacts restoration and how drought impacts salt marshes on a whole. Then I'm going to talk you through this specific project. So the Hester Marsh Restoration Project in Elkhorn, California is really a novel project. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking to you about that. And then I'm going to talk through all the different restoration experiments we've done and the different ways we've tried to strategize how to use different restoration tools to help with this problem of drought stress and ecological drought in these systems. So let's start here. So we all know that salt marshes are ecologically and economically valuable. They provide carbon sinks. They're a commercial nursery for commercial fisheries. And in Elkhorn Slough, it's particularly fun because there's these nice little otters. They're so cute. And that provides tourism, which is a major economic boom for the region, which is kind of cool because you don't always see people out in salt marshes. So it's really cool to see like the ecotourism part of it there. But we also know that they're threatened along the coastline. Here's a good example of land use and development encroaching in on a salt marsh. And in Elkhorn Slough, we have this problem of major infrastructure going through the salt marsh and providing tidal separation between different pieces of the marsh and diking and things like that, so hydrological alteration can be a threat. And I think the main thing that we think about these days is how sea level rise is a threat. So we are in a current sea level that supports a lot of marshes around our coastline, but future projections of sea level, even current sea levels in some places are causing marsh drowning. And in places that don't have the topography, so they have a steep topography, there's no place for them to migrate, or in places where you get coastal squeeze, like here, in a place where there's land development really blocks that marsh from migrating. And that's where restoration comes in, is thinking about how we can use different processes, whether that's restoring the hydrological processes that happen in that marsh, whether that's raising elevation to take a degraded system into something that is going to be persistent through time. And so it's frequently at least talked about, if not used, in salt marshes these days to think about how we can deal with some of these threats by mitigating the circumstances that cause that degradation. And if you look at the literature, just thinking about how this is happening, like there's a growth in the number of publications and the cumulative number of publications after about 2000, where salt marsh restoration is really becoming something that people are talking about more and more frequently, even though we know, especially from here, things like permitting and things like that can be really a time-intensive and expensive thing, that people are thinking about it, studying it more, trying to use it more frequently. And to think about one of the ways that salt marshes are restored, and a lot of people are putting research into, is something like thin layer placement. And many projects are thinking about ways to raise elevation to increase that persistence or the amount of time that a salt marsh is going to be able to stay in the same place as sea level rise happens. So they do things like spray sediment, and for thin layer placement, it's usually just centimeters of sediment onto the marsh platform to give that elevation boost so that the salt marsh can be more stable through time by that added elevation. But one thing that we don't really consider in restoration is the effects of other components of climate change on a project. And even really in salt marsh persistence in general, there are some lines of thinking that have thought about things like drought, but it's very less frequently studied than things like sea level rise. And so when you are restoring for something like sea level rise, you might be neglecting drought, increased flooding, the kind of other things that are going on with the climate system that could cause maybe not total degradation of that system, but maybe a hiccup in the way that you're restoring. And even though I'm going to be talking about California today, I wanted to bring up the most recent drought intensity index that we have. And you can see, as I think we all know, Florida is in an extreme to severe drought. So this isn't just affecting places like a Mediterranean climate, it's also affecting us here. And we don't really know how that drought can play a role in restoration processes and what that means for restoration success. And when we look at the literature, thinking about how those impacts of drought have been studied, a lot of times it's really thinking about that dieback. So this is just an example from Merrill Albert looking at the dieback of an already existing marsh, where you go from, like, you can see the dead vegetation to more of a mud flat through that drought process. And this is an example from actual restoration site here on the right-hand side, where you can see the areas in red over about a 20-year period and a couple of droughts where they have showed dieback, but then areas in green that have actually showed growth of the vegetation. So this is a lot of what the literature is talking about, this change in extent almost of when a drought happens, where are we losing marsh, where are we gaining marsh? And we really were finding this lack of information about what can you do, what can you do to help with these processes so that you don't actually lose your marsh, particularly in a restoration project where you're investing so much money. And so that leads me into talking about Hester Marsh Restoration Project in Elkhorn, Slough, California. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time just talking about what the goals are and what they've done, because I do think it's a novel project and worth talking about. So Elkhorn Slough is a estuary in central California. And I love this picture because I think it really shows how it is integrated into like a mixed landscape. So you can see, obviously, the marshes here, but you can see farmland. There's a power plant here that actually had a battery fire during our time period, which means there were heavy metals and we had to cancel field work, which was a whole other topic. But there is like an integrated landscape where you have natural land, but also working land. So it's really a cool place, a cool laboratory to think about some of these interacting impacts on the landscape and what it's going to look like into the future. Okay, so again, it's in Monterey Bay. It's in the central coast of California. It's in a place that there's been major hydrological change. So they even they moved the inlet to the ocean. So it's coming in from a different place, and the river is coming into a different place. So there's major like hydrological shifts that have happened in this area. And that has caused a loss of a lot of the salt marshes. So this is a picture from 1870, and you can see that most of the slough is covered in salt marshes with just a little bit of mud flat. But when you go to 2000, there's quite a few mud flats all around, much less marsh. And if you can see this gray line that kind of moves through here, that's actually the train track where it hydrologically separates these areas of marsh along here and even up here with lowering the tidal inundation. And so it's a much smaller tidal range and infrequently inundated areas sometimes. And here's Hester right here, which has also been diked or historically diked, which is the site of this restoration project. And so this legacy of diking really shows its mark on the landscape. This isn't Hester. This isn't a previous picture of Hester. It's another site. But you would think that that's all salt marsh, but no, it's mud flat. And this green is actually algae growing on top of it. And you can see some vegetation, but they've lost a lot of marsh due to this diking, due to low sediment and subsidence in that because of that. And even the natural marshes were already seeing drowning. So as I said, it's in California, so the topography is very different from what we live up here. It's very steep topography. There's not a lot of places for these marshes to move. Ultimately, they'll probably be like a bathtub ring of marsh because of just sea level rise until sea level rise stabilizes, because there's no migration space. So that is also something that the managers are thinking about, how to at least keep some of those ecosystem services that those marshes provide into the future when it's looking at, no migration space, nowhere to go. Okay, so this is Elkhorn. Oh, sorry, this is Hester. And you can see here a picture of 1931 where it's a full marsh. And this is a picture from 2013. And again, the bright green is algae. It's not marsh. And the marsh is pretty much gone. So this is what they started with. And this is the plan. So the idea was to take this marsh into the future and think about future sea level rise. So they wanted to take it from this like brown mud flat into a high marsh elevation. And what that meant is not a thin layer placement, but in some areas up to like 1.5 meters of sediment. So really creating a new platform to deal with sea level rise 50 years from now instead of sea level rise today. So trying to make a marsh that's going to be persistent for a long period of time. So really kind of novel in that respect, because not many people are doing such huge construction projects for trying to in marsh restoration. And obviously it's going to be expensive. So Kirstine and Monique are amazing at fundraising, and they managed to raise over $12.5+ million in funding to do the 3 different phases of this restoration project. And I'm also going to talk about how construction can play a role too. So there was a ton of heavy machinery, a ton of moving sediment, which can cause issues for thinking about plant success later on. And this is what the finished product, at least of phase 1, looked like. So you can see it's kind of this light brown here, and these are the remnant marshes on the outside of it. But when I first got there, I thought it looked like a moonscape. It was like, what is this? Because it just is very elevated, very infrequently inundated, and it looks like, just a lot of bare area.
Yeah, and also a quick question. So
Yeah.
in that picture, it looks like there's creeks that are meandering through what I think is the restored area.
Yeah.
Those like intentionally like dug out or left behind?
Yeah, they looked at the historical tidal creeks and tried to replicate those. But one of our questions that I won't talk about today is whether there's enough. So we dug some runnels and did some small experiments with runnels to try to see if we could increase the amount of area that those creeks were reaching, to see if that would help bring back some plants.
Thank you.
Yeah. So they finished the phase 1 in 2019. And what happened after that was a mega drought. So it was about 3 years of very dry conditions. It was, as you can see these headlines here, probably the worst drought in over 1,000 years. And so very, very bad conditions, especially in a Mediterranean climate where you have these like winter rains that really sustain some of those plants. And then summers that are very dry and very hot. And then also in a site where it's not inundated that frequently, that cuts off a lot of the water sources to those areas. And so because of that, they this is looking at like what the 1931 marsh extent was in phase 1, and then looking at 2015, which was before restoration, and then 2019, they really saw like very little plants going on. And you can see here, it's kind of the plants that are creeping in are kind of on the edges of the restoration site where the hill slope is. So in this phase 1, there was higher recruitment immediately adjacent to creeks, so places that are getting a lot of tidal inundation at the highest and lowest elevations. So again, like low elevation next to the creek where there's a lot of tidal elevation, and then high elevation in next to the hill slope where there's probably some groundwater influence, and then in coarser sediments, so sediments that could probably hold a little bit more water. And so this is kind of where we stepped in and said, how can we help you? This isn't going the way that you thought it was going to go. What can we do to run some experiments to try to see if we can understand how to make colonization and vegetation growth happen better? Because I think one of the things to think about with this is that this is at a National Estuarine Research Reserve. So they have all the time in the world, right? Like they are getting to play and develop things. But if this was to move to something that was, a consulting firm or somebody else doing it, there are, 5-year timelines. There are timelines for that vegetation regrowth to happen. So if you're looking at something novel like this, where you're trying to plan for the future in that way, I think hitting those success goals becomes more important. So they were also thinking about it in that context too. So the exciting thing was that although phase 1 had happened, and we saw what had happened in phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3 were either just happening or in the future. So we got to really have some ability to compare different phases, to compare different precipitation years and understand what was going on. And yeah, I think this was a great example of how adaptive management and restoration provides opportunities for experimentation and informing future work. And again, like it's amazing that this happened at a National Estuarine Research Reserve, because we really could work through some of these issues with the managers and trying to develop strategies. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of water. And next, I'm going to talk about the different, this is certainly not all the experiments that we've done, but I'm going to talk about kind of 3 main projects that we've been working on and talk you through what we found and how it has been implemented or not implemented based on what we found. So our 3 main objectives for this project were to assess how the drought affected the sediments, hydrology, and plant growth, to experimentally test restoration strategies to mitigate the effects of ecological drought, and to translate those results directly into adaptive management. So to take what we had learned and try to suggest ways that those managers could use them in the coming phases to experiment more and to see how they would work. So to do this, the first thing we did was tracked survival and recruitment across different planting years and phases. So looking at the, it was nice that we had these different phases going in at different precipitation years, different conditions. So we were able to track how both seedlings recruited to that, but also the survival of transplants that we put in those areas. For the second one, we tested watering and soil treatment strategies. So trying to develop strategies that they could deploy both in changing the soil, but also adding water to help with the drought impacts. And the third was translating the results into adaptive management. And I'm really going to talk about work here that my PhD student has done, and really trying to develop some low-cost ways through seed-based restoration to help with revegetation and something that would be deployed in other areas. Okay, so let's talk about that first objective first, and tracking survival and recruitment across different planting years and phases. We did this using UAV image analysis. So there has been an image of the restoration site taken every month since they were put in, which is amazing. It gives us this great timeline of vegetation change. Also, we put in a bunch of transplants that were in different areas of the phases to track through time to see how they survived. And so using that combination of observational and experimental, we were able to look at the different precipitation years. And one of the things that we thought, I should say this is also work that has really been spearheaded by Kirsten, and as a published paper that came out in 2025. So what we were thinking was that there probably are several trajectories that you might have if you're thinking about restoration success going from low to high and the years since construction completed. If you are encountering different conditions, there could be different ways that you end up at a state after those 20 years. And one might just be a steady increase. But there might be a situation where you have some amelioration of stressor or good conditions where you end up with early success of those plants, where you have this really, huge growth of the plants, and that kind of plateaus into, whatever state it's going to be more permanent. Or you might have late success where you have really heavy stressors leading to low restoration success, hopefully until the end, where those are ameliorated as well. Or you might have something where, it just never changes. It just ends up something where you never have success. So we were trying to understand how precipitation could lead to these different curves, and if we could look at the different phases as examples of these different trajectories, and if they fit this conceptual idea. So just to give you an idea of what the conditions are, up at the top we have precipitation across the years 2018 to 2024. So as you can see, 2018 was a wet year, but then immediately goes into 3 dry years, including a very dry year in 2021. And then starting in 2023, we had a very wet and a wet year. I also put monthly inundation here to give you an idea of like how much inundation is happening, the percent of the time that those sites are inundated. As you can see, it's pretty low. This is just 6% of the time that the sites are inundated. And phase 1 is in yellow and phase 2 is in purple. So you can see where phase 2 came online when they broke the berms, and when that phase 2 were started getting inundated. So let's start with wild Salicornia seedling density. So this is really looking at the recruitment into the area. How are these precipitation years and these different phases impacting the recruitment? And you can see just from the get-go that phase 1 in yellow and phase 2 in purple, that there's a huge difference between these two phases, possibly showing us that the conditions in phase 1 are so stressful that we're not really having seedlings survive in them. But what you can also see is that in phase 2 that came online here and then started growing, is that in this drought year, we didn't see many seedlings recruited at all. But in 2023, which was a very wet year, it was actually an atmospheric river year, we saw that there was a definite increase in seedlings, and that wet year really helped start phase 2. And then when we look at transplants that we planted out there, and these are transplants planted in 2022, transplants planted in 2023, transplants planted in 2024, and this is just in phase 2, that there's a definite difference between those years, where you have 2022 and 2023 seeing better survival rates than 2024, possibly showing that as these phases go along and you have bare areas that are sitting there under the sun with not a lot of inundation, a lot of evaporation, that the conditions of that land might be turning into something that the plants aren't doing a very good job of surviving in. So when we start to think about what this looks like conceptually, we can start kind of piecing together what we've seen. So if this is the beginning with phase 1, and phase 1 kind of goes in with a dry year, we do not see much recruitment. We only get to about 25% recruitment, and then it flattens out. Even with those wet years, it doesn't really change because the conditions of that phase have not really or have gotten worse, and they're not suitable for recruitment during those wet years. Whereas phase 2 that went online, we saw much higher recruitment, although that also flattened out, but we saw a huge amount of gain during those wet years. And this is just a hypothesized trajectory for phase 3, but it started during a wet year and then it moved into some more dry years. So it was maybe we would see that in a situation where that path dependence of whether you start in a dry year and move to a wet year, or you start in a wet year, can change the way that your colonization of that vegetation happens, and really the initial success of those sites. So it's important to think about whether your site's going in a wet year or a dry year, and what the maybe forecast is with El Niños and La Niñas about what water is coming to you in the future. Okay. So next I'm going to move on to the second part of our experiments. And this was really trying to add some ways or some strategies to deal with some of the stressors out there. So again, we're talking about transplants here. So we had a huge experiment where we were putting out a bunch of plants and transplants into these experiments. And then we had sprinkler systems out there that watered across the summer months. And then we also worked with soil amendments and different soil treatments to see if there was ways to think about compaction and different soil properties that might help with those plants. This is just a look at what we did. So we did one large-scale sprinkling experiment in phase 2. And here we really took advantage of the way that things were constructed. So in this top part here are places where the construction, there were the earth movers pushed this farmland fallow field into the marsh to try to build up elevation. So this is like an added soil area. And then up here, because they were scraping all the soil off, this is like a removed soil area that's also more on like the hill slope of where the fallow farm used to be. And so I should also point out that the added soil, because they were adding soil, they compacted that a lot more. So this is also like more of an impacted zone than the removed soil is, where they didn't have to compact as much. So we had this treatment between those two things. And then we also compared phase 1 to phase 2 through like a smaller sprinkler setup over here. And the first thing that we found was that the phases really mattered. This is a picture from phase 1 in our first year where everything failed. Like we couldn't get anything to go in the small scale sprinkler sediment, and we had like 0 survival. We planted it the next year with bigger transplants from the creek beds that had like a root ball with them, and those actually all survived. So we went from having 0 survival to 100% survival, which meant we couldn't do anything with the results there. But at least it did provide an idea to our managers, which was like, maybe we need to use root balls as a way of like starting to get these plants going. So they actually have put out some root balls in areas to try to figure out if adding a little bit of that like marsh mud and the microbes in the marsh mud might help it get going. And this is the phase 2. So you can see this is like the sprinkler zone. You can see it sprinkling. So you can see even outside of the sprinkler zone that it looks a lot better. So again, that wet year really helped for phase 2 to get going a lot better. Okay, so when we look, I should have said in the first one, everything that I'm saying, we've either like backed up with GLMMs or with GAMs, so everything that I'm saying is just statistically significant. I'm not going to go into the statistics, but yeah, I should have said that from the get-go. Okay, so we can see here, looking at the soil properties, and I'm going to focus on 2 here. Actually, I'm going to take you through the figure first, because the figure is kind of repetitive. For each square on the left-hand side, we have added soil. So that's the slightly more stressful soil where they push the fallow field onto it. And on the right-hand side is the removed soil, which is like that scraped hillside, which we think is a little more benign. And then the blue is watered and the orange is not watered. So you can see here, I'm going to mainly focus on soil moisture and salinity. And you can see with salinity that across both soil types that we saw this decrease in salinity with watering as we expected, and also an increase in moisture with the watering as we also expected. But how did that really play a role? Oh, and I should say that this also shows you about the bulk density. The added soil, which is again the more stressful site and more compacted site, had higher bulk density than the removed site did. So what does that mean for the plants? I'm giving you 3 plant species here: Testiculus, Frankinia, and Geomea, all plants that we regularly see in what is normally a Salicornia dominated site, but also these plants provide a lot of diversity to those sites. And we really saw mixed results with these plants with watering. And what I mean by that is that some sites or some plants like Geomea, we see this really, really big increase in watering. Like they love the water, that they thought it was exciting. And so a really good effect there, but nothing as far as Testiculus goes, didn't care about the water, seemed to have something else happening there. And then of course with Frankinia, you can see this interaction effect going on where in the places where it's like more benign, removed soil, there's a watering effect, but in places where the added soil treatment, we're not seeing a watering effect. So really this mixed bag for these species, which was not what we were expecting. We were expecting to go in and water and say like, oh, wow, things are lush and beautiful, like everything needed water. That's not at all what we saw. Definitely mixed effects for different species. And with Salicornia, which again, this is a dominated site, you can see that there was a significant difference between the watered and unwatered in the ambient soil. But when we did the soil treatment, so we added coconut coir and we added potting soil as a way to help ameliorate the stress of those sites, we don't really see much of a difference between watering and unwatered in those sites, or much of a difference between the ambient core and pottering soil. So surprisingly not seeing an effect of that soil treatment in this. So what does that mean? We found surprising difference between the phases on this particular piece of the project. So phase seems to matter a lot for the plant success. Watering definitely improved the soil conditions as far as salinity and soil moisture goes, but watering did not leave a straightforward effects with the plants. Like we did not see that translated into all the plants loved this. And we found that soil history really seems to matter, maybe even more than soil treatments for transplant survival. Okay, I'm gonna talk about the third piece of this, which is the developing seed-based restoration strategies. And this was really something that came about because we kept thinking like, there's got to be a better way to do this than just going out and planting transplants. This is a huge site. We cannot transplant this whole site. There's no way to do that. So is there a way that we could use seeds to try to add to the recruitment already happening out there? But the problem is that we don't know a lot about Salicornia seeds. There's not a lot of information out there. So we did a series of like thinking about how we can pre-treat the seeds, different greenhouse experiments, and then actually moving it into the field to try to develop some of those strategies for the managers. And this is all, again, led by Bethany Lee, who is a PhD student in my lab. And so the first thing I wanted to just point out was, again, I wanted to bring back up this result from the seedlings, which is that there was this major difference between the dry years and the wet years, because you can just look at the y-axis and see that this is 20 and this is 4,000. And then we had these huge differences between the dry and the wet years on how well seedlings did. So that seemed to matter a lot. So really, can we get that 2023 boost from seedlings if we start to add seeds to the site? And so the first thing that we did was look at pre-treatment. So if you think about a wetland plant releases its seeds, there's water coming in and out, they go in the tide, they probably float around on the estuary for a while, and then they come back up at some point. So it's not just like dry seeds are being spread out there, right? There has to be some sort of treatment of that seed before it goes onto the marsh platform. So we tested this through looking at different salinity soaks, so from freshwater to 30 parts per thousand or unsoaked, and then different durations of time. So like, do you need to soak this for 7 days or 3 hours? And we did it in 2 different soil types. So this is like a Hester soil, a stressful soil, and that's potting soil. And the first thing that you can obviously see here is that the potting soil was way less stressful for these seeds, and we got higher germination than the Hester soil. So these seeds are liking the potting soil from the get-go. The second thing to note is that if you are putting something in like a Hester soil, that there does seem to be some sort of like 7-day trend and maybe even fresh water that does really well for improving germination. And so to, even get to like 7 to 10% germination, you really need to think about pre-treating your seeds, because here are the unsoaked with 0% germinated. So thinking about pre-treatment is really important, which was something that's great to hand to managers to say, if you want to use this, this is what you need to do. The second thing that we looked at is where the seeds came from. So Bethany went out into Elkhorn Slough and collected seeds from across various sites, and some that were frequently inundated, some that were less frequently inundated, to try to get an idea of like what the germination success is at different sites. Again, because we just don't know a lot about Salicornia seeds. And so you can see here that infrequently inundated sources tend to do better, with actually Hester doing the best for germination percentage. So really also considering what sort of situation you're adding those seeds into and what are some comparable sites could be a way to increase your germination success as well. She also looked at different, again, different sources that are both natural, so natural tidal range, diked, which have a reduced tidal range, and then restored that are, more of a perched tidal range, and look to see if watering had an effect on the percentage of those seeds or the proportion of those seeds germinated. And we really saw this switch between, places that are natural versus places that are restored, the natural actually needing that water. And for some reason, the restored sources not liking the water as much. So I think, again, like making sure you're sourcing from your seeds from somewhere where you have an idea of what their conditions are that you're getting those seeds from and what they might be genetically or phenotypically adapted for. And so this is also looking at the different soil types and how they did across natural, diked, and restored seed sources. And you can see here that Hester soil did the worst in the green, but potting soil tended to do the best. So these seeds, again, really like to be in potting soil, and so good conditions. And so if there's ways to sow those seeds into better soil conditions, that is something that managers need to take into account. Okay, so we came up with kind of these different pieces of information that we had gleaned from these experiments. So pre-treatment matters. Where you get your seed sources or seeds from can really help determine, what your germination is. And watering seeds and soil medium can improve your seed source. So we had these nuggets, but we took those out into the field. And despite these findings, like a lot of things did not work. It was, I think, very difficult for Bethany to see how hard it was to actually put these seeding into practice. And, and for a lot of reasons, but, I think tidal environments are difficult, and even containing those seeds in a tidal environment so you can have an experiment where that the seeds that you put there stayed where you wanted them to can be very difficult. But one of the most innovative approaches has actually been something, this bermed or walled garden that has been extended into phase 3. And you can see that this berm that was dug around these kind of rows of plants. And you can see, I hope you can see that this is way more green in the middle here. So what we did was berm that garden and keep it from being inundated by the tides, let those plants grow, and did this during the rainy season. So they're getting a lot of water. There's at one point there was a whole lake almost in this little bermed garden. And that really seemed to have the most impressive success that we've had so far for as far as seeding goes. So thinking about ways to remove those stressors away from the seedlings tends to help a lot. Okay, so we've gone through all 3 sections of this now, talking about what droughts can do in restoration, this particular novel project, and then what we did to try to figure out how to help managers with restoration strategies. And I just wanted to talk through some of the findings that we had. As you can tell by what I've said, it's been really a mixed bag of results. And sometimes it's hard to figure out okay, how can we move forward with these? I mean, I think that one thing that we found is they did not put sprinklers in phase 3 because we found that it wasn't worth it. So I think that is a way to think about cost savings. Even if we didn't find what we thought we were going to with sprinklers, there isn't an answer for them. The results of the experiments may surprise you, which is exactly why you need them. I think even the picture between phase 1 and phase 2, where we had nothing work and then everything worked, it's been very interesting. Areas with less compaction tend to do better. So if there's ways that you can construct a restoration project that use less machinery, or go back in after the machinery's been used and till it up, or try to add more, try to decrease the compaction, those areas tended to do better. Under certain circumstances, watering can mitigate drought. So I think our advice with that one is really understand what you're trying to restore and whether or not watering is going to have an impact on it, what plants. Harnessing the wet years is very, very important. That was the biggest success that we've seen, is the difference between the wet years and the dry years. So trying to understand what your forecast is and whether or not to put something in a particular year could be very important. And I think the best part about this whole project was the adaptive managed piece of it, where how they were willing to work with scientists to come in and to do experiments and take that information and move it into future phases. I think was a great way to think about large restoration projects, and really important thing to consider when somebody else is planning a restoration project. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody who worked on this. We had an amazing group of volunteers that went in and put a ton of plants in. Could not have been done without them. They came out and, got out there and planted a whole day, many times. Obviously, all the graduate students and also my colleagues, Margaret Zimmer, Kirstine Wasson, and Monique Fountain, also been hugely critical. And our funding source, which is the NOAA NIDIS program, and their ecological drought series. So really want to thank them as well. And with that, I will take questions.
Thank you so much. Questions from the audience?
Yeah, really cool talk. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So kind of big picture, it's really interesting to hear about a restoration around building high marsh, targeting sea level rise 50 years from now. I guess the model I'm more used to is focusing on low marsh, which is gonna
Yes.
accumulate the sediments and build like the carbon sequestration and stuff. And
Yes.
maybe that lasts 50 years into the future. Sort of curious what's sort of the justification or the rationale for targeting a high marsh from the get-go.
It really is the bathtub, right? Like and part of the scraping down the hillside was to make more area to have that marsh migrate into as well. So I think, from a Florida perspective, we're so used to having something that's just a giant coastal plain where you can go out and there's not really much elevation change, but they are really worried about losing all of their marsh. So I think for them, it was a way to experiment to see, if we can at least make it 50 more years, we know that we'll have at least this one little pocket because we are currently losing a lot. Like they are actively losing a lot of their marsh. So I think that was the difference in thinking about it, was that there was no way to change their sediment sources. There was no way to there's no dam upstream where they can increase the sediment in the river or something like that. They really had to think about ways to actively build something that was going to go into the future. So it was just it was a different challenge, I guess. Yeah, because they've lost a lot of sedimentation from the river too. I didn't mention that, but they don't have a lot of sediment coming to that system as well. So.
And one more question. Have you guys considered looking at soil mycorrhizal fungi?
We have a different graduate student under at UC Santa Cruz that's been working on some experiments with that. So doing sterile plantings where the plant's going into a completely sterile medium versus I don't remember what the medium, there's another medium that's not marsh soil versus marsh soil, and looking to see if it's actually the possible mycorrhizal or microbial community that's coming from that marsh soil that helps those plants. So we are looking at, I should say that somebody else is looking at that. Yeah.
I understand it can help convert drought resistance in dew plants.
Yeah, it would be based on phase 1 where we saw nothing survive coming from a greenhouse transplant to phase 1, the first year where we saw nothing survive coming from a greenhouse transplant to that second year where we were actively taking full plants and their soil root balls and planting those and everything survived. I definitely think there's something to be said for those. I can't say what exactly is in that soil, but for something that's coming along with that plant that's helping it out. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
We work mostly on the places that you don't want to see the mud flats, right?
Right.
And so we see wildly different consolidation stages with time, with space, with slightly different changes in composition of grain sizes and history. And also the drought was wet. I would expect that the clay, some may be swelling, some may not, right? Some crack, and they may not never go back to what they were. Have you guys looked in? So I guess, was there ever a consideration of thinking about compaction and bulk density with time and space?
We have not done, we've done time, but we've not done space. I'm the hydrologist on this project, did a lot of that. So I'm trying to think about her work. I'm pretty sure she's done time, but not space in that paper they're working on right now. So I'm not exactly sure what the final results of those are. Yeah. But we do think that with phase one, that it has entered some sort of state where like it's hard for it to come back from that. So, or, you know, over longer periods of time, sure, but like for success right now, it's hard for it to come back. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, well, so sort of following up on that, you know, this phase one, you said like phase is really important, but phase is sort of like site in ecology. Phase
Yes.
is sort of catch-all thing.
Yes.
So maybe it gets to the question that Nina was asking, but like, so you expected the phase one effort is sort of locked into sort of its phase one success, right? Like, is it something, so what is it? Is it about it got hypersaline, so like, is there a physical or a mechanism that you think is associated with that?
Yeah, so we do see like higher salts and worse compaction. And so some of the things that they actually got a grant to go in and reduce parts of phase one. So they are, or I guess I should say last year, so we don't have the results from this yet, they went and actively tilled areas to try to like turn up the soil a bit, to try to like break up some of those really compacted areas. And then they are also like trying out some things like runnels and things like that to bring water to other areas as well. So, I'm actively trying to fix that problem, but you know, we don't have the changes yet. So. Yes.
I'm sorry, I missed this at the beginning, but was all the added soil from that kind of farmland soil that was pushed in?
All the sites that I'm talking about, yes, are all from farmland. There is like another site on the other side that's dredged sediment, but I did not talk about anything that's on dredged sediment.
Got it. Yeah. So I can imagine that it could be very that's an interesting method. I wasn't aware of like people doing that exactly.
Yeah.
But I can imagine that the history of that soil. I mean, you indicated soil history matters, but what do you know like what was farmed on that land and how long it been fallow before being pushed in?
I don't remember how long it's been fallow, but it's been fallow for a little while.
Yeah.
Because the partnership bought it for, you know, they had it for a while before. And they're actually, I think at some point they are hoping to buy the dairy there too, so that the whole surrounding area is owned by the partnership. But I think it was strawberries and lettuce. So a lot of the area around there does strawberries and lettuce.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's probably has some sort of legacy effects of nutrients, I would assume.
Yeah, I would think like either from what was applied or what was just from the crops that have been kind of tilled in at the seasons or whatever. And then also my thought had been like were seeds from those previous crops that like popped up in the restored marsh area, but I guess lettuce and
they're not really salt tolerant, so as soon as it got flooded, it wasn't going to matter. I should say the organic matter, because the topsoil got mixed up with everything else. Like when they were pushing it down, they actually changed this in phase 3. They tried to take the topsoil and remove it, push all the soil down, and then put the topsoil back on top so that there's more organic matter. But in phase 1 and 2, they mixed everything up, so there's not. It's very low organic matter because of that. Like the soil has very, very low organic matter.
Do we have any questions online?
Yeah, Elise.
Hi, Anna. Thanks so much for your talk. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, do you want me to
Or do
unmute?
you just want to read it?
No, she doesn't type anything in. Yeah, I guess you're muted there.
Yeah.
I can type it in if needed.
Elise. Oh, no, I'm not muted.
Oh,
wait,
okay,
no, it's
great.
probably muted down here.
Can you hear me okay? I
Yes,
can hear you
speaker
well.
versus microphone. Let's see.
I was just kind of thinking more about Andrew's question too, and so
There you go.
Okay, Elise.
can you hear me okay? Can you hear me all right?
Don't hear you.
Okay. I'll type it in the chat if you can't hear me.
Tell her to try again.
I'm just gonna type it.
Okay.
You're saying that in the Zoom they can hear her, of course.
Yeah, usually.
She said, building on Andrew's question, have you characterized any nutrient subsidies?
No, we have not. That was not part of this project, but there are other people that have been working on that.
Any other questions?
Oh, and added that may influence recruitment, success, or microbial interactions. That's probably the rest of your question. But you answered it.
Any last questions?
I think you might have touched on this and I missed it. Do you think there are differences in like porosity between the removed versus the added spots? And do you think that could impact the effect of adding water to those
Yeah,
systems?
based on the bulk density, I think there are. Yeah, so I think that could impact the water holding. I also think, I didn't touch on this, but our hydrologist also did transects from the hill slope into the marsh, looking at, and put wells in, looking at water movement and also how the water content changes. And I do think being right up against the hill slope has this added subsidy of groundwater influence in those areas because it is Mediterranean climate. And so you have water builds up over the course of the winter that provides like a longer time period that those plants next to the hill slope can receive that water. Like it's just sitting there more in the groundwater as it's moving through the system for a longer period of time than the plants that are kind of more out on the like plain or the platform. And so I do think that those plants that are closer to the hill slope and it's this convoluted piece of its removed soil, but it's also closer to the hill slope, tend to be getting that water as well. Yeah, and from previous work, we've also seen that in these systems, freshwater really does matter. Like we have another site in a natural marsh where we're seeing that impact of freshwater really play a role in like how the vegetation and the nutrient dynamics change on a transect from the upland to the I guess the more platform area.
Great. Any other questions? For the first, for the second? Thank you so much again. I really appreciate it. Chairman, if you can pull up the announcements. We have a couple of additional announcements to share that I do not have in my head, but I have to read. There we go. So on August 7th, our CCS social that the students are organizing, this time they want to do a trivia night. So if you're around, consider joining. They would really love if we can vamp up the participation on those events. I know summer is always a little bit tough, but if you have the chance, join that. It's really fun. And on August 20, we have our next monthly Science Forum presentation. We will have some guest speakers from our neighbors at UCF. So Ivan Hay and Thomas Wall will be joining us. So Ivan is just, was I think over the last year or two appointed the new director for the National Center for Integrated Coastal Research at UCF. And Thomas is doing a lot of really cool work on compound flooding modeling and observation. So I really encourage you guys to join for this as well. And I think we have some more.
It's just slow.
So we have a few really awesome publications that came out. So big shout out to everyone who got papers out, really exciting work. And this was in June-ish. And so just as a call out, send us your news, right? We want to distribute those news, so don't be shy. Send us more info. If anything comes out, let us know. And then Andrew, do you want to talk quickly about, since you're here, about the big group?
Yeah, so we got a nice group out there. I think it was just last week to visit sites along the intercoastal, in the vicinity of where we've been doing EWN-sponsored research now for a few years, but this was a chance to get a lot of people out there together, and many of them for the first time. So Aaron and Julie were out there, and generally our focus out there is kind of shifting from like the kind of interior of the marshes to now thinking about more about the kind of edge of the marsh, particularly where it borders intercoastal, and thinking more about the interactions between kind of like the river dynamics, like wave energy in particular and flow, and then oysters and vegetation. So it started in kind of, I'm thinking of it as like the start of kind of a new phase in the research because of that new focus. And so there's a few different projects I think are gonna spin out of this. But we also brought people out that haven't been part of the EWN project historically. Like folks like Mark Hensel came over from Cedar Key to join us for the day, and then we had folks like Patrick Norby, who's been working there longer than I have, and so it's nice to get that kind of this like range of perspectives and experience out there. So yeah, there will be other trips out there, maybe not quite just a big scouting trip like that, but if you're interested in visiting those sites, like let me know and we'll get you on the trip there, and we'll probably give you some of that stuff and possibly do as well.
So I'd be out there a lot.
Yeah, and I'll just, if you don't mind, I'll just say, I just want to introduce Aaron Bland, who's a new postdoc, sponsored by the EWN project, working in my lab with all of us ideally, and he's had kind of like a soft introduction to SE because he's actually in CCS because he's been here for over a month since starting the position. But just want to take the opportunity to introduce him and take the time to introduce yourself to him. He's coming out of Ronnie Baker's lab at Dauphin Island, where he did his PhD on living shorelines projects, and has a array of experience. He's working cold water systems up in Alaska for his master's, so really well-rounded kind of perspective on coastal environments.
Since you're editor, do you also want to talk about the meeting in Paris?
Yes, I was in Paris. So this was a workshop for the Global Ocean Oxygen Network. It's a working group sponsored by UNESCO. I've been a member of the group for a few years now, and they have an in-person meeting annually. They also do some public-facing, like online seminar series, and folks from the group are kind of intermingled in various kinds of conferences and workshops elsewhere around the world. But generally, it's to look at both causes and consequences of ocean deoxygenation, and that's both in coastal environments and the open ocean, which are essentially different processes, or the relative importance of different mechanisms varies tremendously in those settings. And yeah, we have like just a series of synthesis papers that come out of that and new projects, and I'm meant to be spearheading like a database for where these occurrences are happening worldwide. They're just kind of poorly documented, so a lot of the data is either not published or it's in kind of white papers or government reports. So one of the things I'm kind of contributing to that group.
Great, cool. And then a few additional news from our students. So the CCS Student Club has been really active and very sought out for outreach events. So call out to all the students here, get engaged with that. We need more volunteers and helpers, since I think they get almost requests for every other month now from libraries and schools, and there has been a lot of attention. So this is a really great opportunity to give back to the community and to engage with communities, and also do a little bit of actually rehearsing how to explain things to a wider audience. So I would highly encourage everyone to participate. And then Amanda Chappell defended her dissertation. Yay, Amanda, congratulations. She did her PhD with Elise Morrison, right?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Right.
So also congratulations to Elise there. And then Stephen Aduse, one of, yeah, exactly. Stephen just defended yesterday, so he's a student in my lab, and he defended his proposal defense, so not all the way yet, but yesterday successfully. So also congratulations to Stephen. And then yes, so again, students, join the student club, contact Noah and Leah if you're interested in any of these activities. And one thing for the student club that I want to mention, on next Tuesday, we will actually do another kind of field training activity. We will take the cone penetration test rig out to Cedar Key to actually test compaction of mudflats. And so if anyone additionally to the people already signed up, I think right now we have 5 CCS students signed up in addition, so let me know and we can probably fit in some more. And then just like as a reminder, the CCS Service Hub is running, so check out the website for equipment available. And then our friends and colleagues and collaborators at Fiber, they're organizing a conference on digital twins for resilient urban environments, DTRU, and that will be held on November 19th to 20th of this year at the new UF JAX campus. And so you can submit an abstract or video by the end of this month. So don't wait too long for that. And the link for that is here, and otherwise contact Stacy Dolan if you have more questions about that. And I think this is it, right? Thanks everyone for attending, and make sure to join us next month or at a social event or other activities. Thanks again to Anna for presenting. It was a great talk. So thanks everyone, and see you next time.
Yeah, sorry, just one more announcement. So we are gonna hire a kind of a shorter term, kind of like technician type position, like OPS basically for a few months. Someone ideally who's AAUS certified, like scientific diver certified. Might be willing to consider someone who's not, but we decided to make this hire today, so we're gonna draft kind of a job ad that we'll distribute through the CCS channel, so you'll hear more about it formally later, but I thought I'd take the opportunity, because I saw the kind of jobs as sort of one of the items on the announcement type, so yeah, just stay tuned. But if you have someone in mind, like someone who's like maybe finishing in your one of your labs, who's kind of like looking for something right now, because I know we're kind of like off cycle a little bit, yeah, send them my way, and then my way, and we can, thank you.